Let's listen in.
This is gauze. Okay, so this gauze has been treated with a chemical agent. It's called hemostatic gauze. And so the chemical agent on the gauze is designed to help the blood clot faster. Okay, so if you have access to a bleeding control kit or a trauma kit, this would definitely be your go-to. But so we're working on it. That's a great question. Right now, we are at the forefront of public education when it comes to bleeding control. Okay, so police officers recently all have tourniquets on their utility belts. Schools are starting to put up bleeding control kits, just like you see the AFib defibrillators or the Heimlich posters or the fire extinguishers. This is going to be part of that as well. I always tell people the very first TV PSA, public service announcement, was in the late 60s, and it was Dick Van Dyke, and he was doing a public service announcement. People were catching on fire. The rayon fabric that was popular at the time was highly flammable, and so the government stepped in and said, we need public education. Okay, and so you could stop anybody on the street in 2019 and ask them what stop, drop, and roll means, and they know. And that's because we've had all of these years of public education. So we're at the forefront of public education when it comes to bleeding control. And so to answer your question, no, they're not easily accessible. And that's why we're spending so much time getting this information out into the public, while also working with institutions and agencies so that it is widely available. Okay, but for right now, we're going to take the steps to empower ourselves. We're not going to wait for these institutions and these buildings to make us safe. And so we're going to learn these techniques ourselves. Deal? There we go. All right, so like you said, you can take anything absorbent, cotton, gauze, anything you have, shirt sleeve, a towel. Don't worry about the cleanliness of it. The hospital has every local site antibiotic known to man and can cure any infection. Okay, so you're literally going to want to take whatever you have and you're going to want to pack it into the wound. Okay, and literally you're going to stuff it in, and what you're doing is you're filling the internal surface area, and by continuing to stuff it, you're actually applying pressure inside as it's pushing out against the walls of the injury. Okay, once you have that in, you're going to go right back to direct pressure. Again, that's 2 hands, constant, steady, no pumping, no peeking. Okay, our last technique, so we've done direct pressure, we've packed the wound, it's still bleeding, we're not out of the woods yet. Okay, our last technique is a tourniquet. Okay, this is a tourniquet. Some of you may have seen it in movies before. Some of you have maybe seen makeshift versions where they take like 2 sticks and a piece of fabric and twist it around. But this is what a tourniquet looks like. It works just like a belt, and the idea is to apply as much constrictive force as possible. You literally want to squeeze the part of the body so that blood cannot get through the vein and the arteries. Okay? General rule of thumb is that the tourniquet goes between your heart and the injury. Okay, so for example purposes, let's say I've been injured on my leg. All right, I could have been stabbed, I could have walked past the corner of a desk too quickly, I could have been in a car accident. The point I'm making is that you can sustain an injury anytime, any place, anywhere, anyhow. I don't want to link it just to violence. I don't want to link it to anything specific. I want the public to be prepared. That's what today's all about. Okay, so if I sustain an injury to my leg, I'm going to apply the tourniquet 2 to 3 inches above the injury. Easiest way to measure that is take about 2 or 3 fingers, put it right above the injury. Okay, and then you're literally going to use your tourniquet and you're going to get it as tight as possible around that part of the body. Okay, I'm sorry, it's a little twisted right here, but we're literally going to pull and pull and pull as tight as we can. We're going to start to feed that around, and we're not done yet. Does everybody see this tool here? This little stick guy? Yeah. It's called the windlass. I didn't name it, I just like saying it. Windlass, right? But you're going to take this and you're going to twist it and twist it to get even more torque and tension on the tourniquet. All right, now see a couple of people making faces. It does not tickle. I'll tell you that much. It does not feel great. But again, we're talking about saving someone's life. Okay, so we all have to get over our squeamish feelings. We may have to comfort the person that we're providing aid to. They may be hollering and calling you names that you've never heard before, or maybe you have heard them before. I don't know, but it's all about saving someone's life. Okay, so we've got our windlass tight, put in the holster. We're just gonna bring everything around and seal it like this. Now, does everyone see how tight that is on the leg? All right. Now, what do you notice on this white band here? It says time. Okay. It's important to note what time the tourniquet was put on so that when professional help arrives, they know how long that part of the body has been without blood or oxygen. Okay. You're not at risk. The limb won't automatically be amputated or anything like that. I only mention that because those are some of the misconceptions about a tourniquet. As soon as you use a tourniquet, the person's leg is going to have to be amputated. That's not the case, okay? This is to apply enough constrictive force to stop or stem the flow of blood, and you're pretty good anywhere between 4 to 6 hours with the tourniquet on before you're at risk of losing a limb, rather. Okay? Now, the first question I always get is, what if I don't have a tourniquet? It's a great question. I'm glad you guys asked, all right? So, if you don't have a tourniquet, you can use a tie, you can use a headscarf, okay? People always mention a belt, but the problem with the belt is that a lot of us, all of us possibly, our waist isn't as narrow as our leg, okay? And so if you use a belt, unless you've got one of the fancy ratchet belts, by the time you get the belt around the limb and get it as tight as you need it to be, there's no hole to maintain that pressure. You can make a hole, but in an emergency, I don't know if you've ever tried to put a hole through a leather belt. That's a little tough to do in an emergency. So a belt is a good idea, but I always caution people because you don't want to be in the middle of a situation and then realize the belt doesn't work. So if you're able to hold and maintain the pressure, the belt is a good idea. However, if there are issues with strength, or maybe it's just not the proper setting to be standing and holding a belt until help arrives, you want to keep that in mind. You want to stay away from things that have a narrow surface area, like shoestring. All right, a lot of people go, oh, I can use a shoestring. The problem with the shoestring is that it's so narrow that by the time you get it tight enough, right, to really, again, stop or stem the flow of blood, is a good chance that it will cut through the skin. And so, again, you can be at risk of causing more harm than good, okay? So those are our 3 kind of pretty basic techniques. Stop the bleed, set of wound management protocols so that you know what to do and that you're prepared to take action in the event of an emergency. All right, does anybody have any questions or anything?
What did you say was the right thing to use if you don't have a tourniquet?
If you don't have a tourniquet, you can use a necktie. You can use a headscarf. If you're able to kind of rip the sleeve off like they do sometimes in the movies, anything that's pliable enough to go around and then be tied, all right? You want to stay away from things like a shoelace. You want to be mindful if you have to use a belt, some of the complications that we just discussed when it comes to using a belt.
Are tourniquets available to the public?
They are. That's another great question. Who paid this young lady? No, but thank you for these great questions. Tourniquets are very widely available to the public. They sell them in the medical supply stores. And I say medical supply as opposed to pharmacy because the new school pharmacies kind of sell everything. They're like corner stores. And so the medical supply stores where they have the crutches and the walkers, they'll have the tourniquets as well. And just like, you know, when we learn about fire safety, it's good to have a fire extinguisher in the home. It's good to have a tourniquet or something of that sort in the home with you. Okay? All right. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
If you don't have a clean cloth, what about if you don't have a clean cloth, like you are on the side of the road and somebody is bleeding? What do?
That's a great question. Do not worry about the cleanliness of the cloth. You stuff it in there, you tie it around them, you use these techniques, and you stop the flow of blood. The hospital has every antibiotic known to man. They can cure any local site infection. Let's assume worst case scenario. You use something that was contaminated and now their leg has to be amputated. That's a very unfortunate scenario. However, it's still about saving the person's life. Okay, so I tell everyone, do not waste your time worrying about the cleanliness of a cloth or a rag or anything that you're using. use these techniques and use them quickly to stop or stem the flow of blood.
How do you know which wound you're supposed to stop? Like, let's say you are in the subway and somebody slashed somebody with a knife, and the cut is like that compared to this one. How do you know? You can stop both of them, or you can just apply pressure?
The goal is to get direct pressure as much as possible. You want to try and identify the injury that's causing the most blood loss, or you want to rally help. Hey, I need you, sir, with the hat and the glasses. You want to be specific. You don't want to say, somebody help, right? You want to be very specific. You, sir, with the hat and the glasses, I need you over here. You put 2 hands over here. I got 2 hands over here. But to answer your question, you want to get direct pressure on the injury, right? If somebody is cut or slashed in the subway, direct pressure, okay? Immediately. Direct pressure can be used in any and every scenario. The other techniques were only when the injury is a little bit more severe and direct pressure isn't stopping the flow of blood, okay?
So if you have to help somebody who have emergency, like some people, they'll be like worried about what kind of, maybe the person have blood disease like HIV and all that. When you touch the blood?
That is a great question. I even have on the table, if people really want to do the full demonstration, I even have gloves, because the reality is when you're dealing with blood or any other bodily fluids, you don't know. And so what I tell people is you only render you feel it's safe to do so. And so if that means that you can't help the stranger because you don't know, I'm not mad at that. I'm not mad at that. And I know that doesn't...
Obviously, everybody wants to help, but in that kind of emergency, what do you do? Because you never know who is who.
Right, no, I get what you're saying. And yes, our kind human nature wants us to help, but again, only if you feel it's safe to do so. And if you don't know a person's status, or if you're not sure what their bodily fluids may contain, and you don't feel it's safe to do so, then you may not be able to render help at that time. If I'm at a party with my friends and somebody starts shooting and a friend of mine gets hit, it's a friend. Of course I want to help. But if it's not safe for me to do so and I get injured in the process, then A, I didn't help anything, but B, now we require double the resources to come and provide aid and assistance, okay? As uncomfortable and as icky, for lack of better words, as it makes us feel, I may have to step back and wait until the coast is clear, until whatever's going on has kind of passed before I can render aid. If we only use these techniques on our friends and family, I'm okay with that. As long as everybody's doing it, then we're all protected. Okay, so those are great questions, but you definitely want to protect yourself first.
Okay, I want to thank Osakwe from Harlem Hospital for that great presentation on Stop the Bleed.
Yes, my
okay,
pleasure.
we're going to move on to the next presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so just announce into the camera that we're going to the active shooters coming in.
Okay, we are now moving inside. Harlem Emergency Preparedness Day continues to the Stop the Shooter presentation by Public Safety from City College personnel.